Okay, so I'm going to outline a little bit how this is going to work today. So the objectives are, we want to give you some techniques to enhance group process and function in PBL. We're going to look at different ways to use formative and summative feedback in PBL, and we're also going to have an approach to certain difficult scenarios that can sometimes crop up during tutorials. The way that we're going to do this is we're going to have a large group session with a presentation about 15 minutes, followed by a small group breakout. You'll automatically be assigned to a breakout room with either myself, Michael, or Sharon, and we're going to work through an actual hands-on scenario where you'll get a chance to really ask questions, and we'll challenge you with certain situations. So Mike will start off, we'll talk about PBL process. The second part will be feedback in PBL with myself, followed by Sharon with some difficult PBL scenarios. And then we'll come back for a wrap-up session. One of the things I wanted to get a feel for, we'll just do a little poll. And the one question I wanted you to answer was, have you ever tutored PBL before? I know some of you probably are using this as preparation, knowing that you're going to be doing PBL. Some of you, have already been involved in PBL many times. And again, I'm making some assumptions here. PBL stands for problem-based learning. Something I assume most people knew that when they signed up for this. Okay, so if we look at the results, it's actually a pretty good mix. So about a third of people have never even tutored PBL before. But 50% of people have done this many times. Interesting. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Mike, and we're going to get started on the first part of the session.
So we're just going to move to the first section, which is looking at PBL process and function, specifically around the group. So I'm going to do a general introduction, and then we'll use this as a basis of a scenario that we're going to do as a workshop. So the learning objective for this part is really to optimize techniques to enhance group process and function. So to start with, for group function, really our role as a facilitator in small group teaching is multifunctional. So small group teaching is designed to be learner focused. And so we have a number of things that we do simultaneously, but a broad way to think about it is three major areas that we're simultaneously managing as the small group facilitator. The first is the group, and by this, they're meaning like the interaction and the function of the group. The second is the group activities. What are they doing? How are they doing it? And then the third is the group learning. How are they progressing in terms of their learning process? So you can see that our role is really to facilitate learning. And this can mean many different things at different times. So at times it can mean leading the discussion. At times it can mean asking open-ended questions to encourage the discussion, to ask them to explore it deeper. At times we're guiding the process and making sure that they're heading in the right direction. And at all times, we're really trying to ensure active participation. So the first part we talked about was that we're managing the group interaction and function. And many of you may have seen this schematic before in terms of a group interaction and group formation. So the idea is that we go through different stages. Initially, as they all get together for the first time, they're in the forming stage, they're meeting, they're sort of figuring out what they're doing together. The storming stage is the next stage where they're trying to sort out how do they function together, what roles are they playing and whatnot. And eventually, hopefully they move to the norming stage, which is when they start to understand their roles, the responsibilities, the function, how the group works, and optimizing it to the performing stage. Eventually, the last stage is we're adjourning, where there's usually a natural end to the group, usually the last tutorial. I also wanted to point out that although they point this as a nice trajectory, it often can be back and forth. So you may find yourself suddenly back at the storming stage in the middle of the process, and that's okay. And they go back to hopefully norming and performing. And the reason this is important to think about is that the group function is different in each of these formation stages. And then the role that you play as a facilitator also is different depending on the stage that they're in. In one of the papers, I liked this graphic where they talked about, this is maybe more the traditional didactic teaching that we're used to, and that in small group and PBL formats are really trying to move away from the facilitator interaction and being the leader to this multi-directional interaction where everyone is sort of talking and interacting with each other, and you're part of that process. So we're trying to, not to say that you may never be in this situation, but we're trying to move towards the latter situation there. So problems that may arise in terms of group interaction and function, they preempt that students tend to have learned, first of all, in a didactic setting before they came to whatever school they're in. So they tend to default to a didactic and lower level learning when something's new, when they don't know what is expected of them. So some of the tools that's recommended for that to counteract that problem in group function is to really take the time in the group formation. So especially in the beginning, creating a safe, effective working atmosphere for learning. And this is essential. If they don't feel safe, they tend not to want to participate. So some things that you can do there is taking the time for introductions to each other, setting ground rules collaboratively. So setting them together so that they feel they're part of the group and that they've had a say in terms of how the learning is going to take place. Discussing expectations. So what are the roles that we expect them to play? What are the roles they can expect us to play? Ensuring process and learning objectives are clear. And this is one of the things they said is really important, because when they don't know what to expect, they tend to resort back to lower level and didactic teaching. So being as clear as we can, trying to answer their questions if there's any questions about what are they expected to do. Feedback, using the feedback sessions, checking out. It's a good way to revisit, do they feel comfortable? How is the formation within the group going? Do they have any questions? And that may help to lower the anxiety around. And just to remember, especially if this is their very first time in PBL, it can be very anxiety provoking for them. So other problems that may arise in terms of group interaction and functioning, some of these you may have experienced already. If there's a dominant student in the group that's always participating over others, or the opposite, a quiet student who's sort of sitting quietly, not really contributing, and you can't really tell if they know the information or not. Times when they're always looking to you for the answer as opposed to interacting more with each other. Discussions that tends to turn into an argument more than an actual about the facts or about what the actual theory is. So tools that they suggest that may help if you run into some of these problems is reflective questioning and using feedback or checkout. So questioning, so how did it go today? What is not going well? What can we improve the next time? Or how did we feel the level of participation engagement was today? Was it equal? Is there something we need to work on there? Any comments on the group interaction? If you're really concerned, then should we revisit our ground rules? How are we doing in applying them? That was some of the tools that they suggested using questions as opposed to telling them outright, this is what I'm observed. Sometimes it's helpful if you get them to reflect back what they're noticing. So that was for the first part in terms of managing the group, in terms of interaction and function. The second part was looking at the group activities, so managing that part. Some common problems that may arise in managing the group activities is timing, tutorials ending consistently early or late, discussions consistently going off track, or disorganized approach to a question that they have, that they're missing covering certain objectives or missing certain points. And again, not to say that you're not going to encounter these once in a while, but if you're noticing this consistently, that may be a problem. So some tools, again, that may help is reviewing roles and using checkout as feedback. So roles can be really important here, especially if the group agrees and identifies as a problem. So what are the student roles? Are there things that they can do to help identify the issue at hand, such as if they're consistently running late, does somebody want to take turns being a timekeeper, keeping the group on time, for example? Tutor roles, clarifying what is our role. So for example, if they're always, looking to us to get the answer when they're going off track, we need to sort of maybe emphasize, okay, what is our role that we're playing here? And yes, we can maybe direct them if we feel they're going off track, but our role is, for example, not to answer the question necessarily for them. And again, using the feedback and checkout, it's a time for reflection. Are they even aware that there's an issue? Are they even aware that, for example, they're going off track many of the times and not getting to the other objectives? Or if they are, that's easier, then it's a way to work through it with them. So that's for group function. The last component they mentioned that we need to simultaneously manage is the group learning. So how is that going? And this idea is that this graphic was part of that article. I've referenced the article at the bottom. But this idea is that we're trying to get them to go from factual learning up to higher level learning, such as synthesis. And so the problems that may arise is that discussions may really turn into fact sharing. well, this textbook says X, Y, Z, and everyone's sort of nodding in agreement. And that's a certain level of knowledge. That's not a bad thing necessarily, but we want to know, can they synthesize it? Did they go up the levels of learning? Sometimes the problem can be it's unclear if they really do understand the concept. They're able to rote memory explain it, but do they understand and can they apply it? And are they able to apply it to broader context? So if some of the information changes, are they able to apply the same concepts? So the tip is to use frequent questions. So if you find that they just seem to be explaining just the knowledge pieces, we can use questions to really assess their knowledge, but also their understanding. So help me understand, how would this be different if this person was 80 instead of 16? It also can help promote critical reasoning. Do they understand how to work through a problem? Encourages them to reflect. Sometimes they may understand like, oh, actually, I don't really know how to apply it in this case. Let's run through that. It also helps to monitor progress. So it's not surprising in the beginning if they can't apply it, but then as they go on, are they able to understand, oh, now I understand how this connects and makes the connections that way. This in the article was just some examples of types of question you may ask depending on what you're trying to actually elicit. So if you're trying to understand, do they understand the data or the evidence? So what evidence is there to support that? If you're just wanting to clarify, like, do they understand the concept? Can you explain what that means? Can you explain that more fully? Or if I was a patient, how would you explain that to me? Or what do you think that would mean? Why do you think that would be the case? And this is a nice question, especially if you have a quiet learner that, you don't necessarily want to put in the spot, or like, what do you think about that? Right? It's a good way to involve people. If you're wanting them to link concepts, how does this idea support what we mentioned earlier on? How does this relate back to the case we just covered last week, and getting them to make those connections? Hypothetical is another great way to see, do they understand how to connect this? So what would happen if, or as we mentioned, like, how would this be different if this was an 80-year-old? Or how would this be different if this was a person with low socioeconomic status? And it's just getting them to link concepts together. And summary and synthesis, what are we still uncertain about? Or can we summarize in 2 sentences the main learnings of today, kind of thing? So again, these are some questions you may use just to get an idea of where they in that learning process. Is there work that still needs to be done? So in summary, this was just to give a framework that group functioning, you see, as a facilitator, we're really managing 3 different broad categories. We're managing the group in terms of their interaction and functions. We're managing the group activities in terms of what are they doing and how are they doing it. And then the group learning. So where are they in the stage of learning? Do they need to increase their level of understanding or level of learning?